Hey, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
And I'm Mark Tucker, and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
New Voice Devs. Oh, another
Hey,
week,
Alan.
Mark. Hey, how's it going?
It's going good, thanks.
Good. Man, I don't know about you. I am constantly tired. I am constantly running around trying to keep my head above water. Running around keeping your head above water. There's a great mixed metaphor for
That's
you there.
mixing. Yeah, that's mixing. Yeah, maybe it's a very humid, place that you're living, and it's just, um, yeah. Well, you're doing a lot of things, so it's just you've got your full-time work, and you've got, big stuff that you're doing on the side with things. So I understand that why you're so busy and so tired.
Yeah. Well, and you're doing a lot of new stuff as well. So
Yeah, so I'm excited for new opportunities where I'm at, and just getting to know a new company, new people. So it'll be great.
it's always
Um,
a great time. So yeah, so one of the things I've been doing a lot more recently is working with all sorts of different agent frameworks. You both Google's Agent Development Kit and the LangChain LangGraph.js agent development components, which are there's not really a separate kit. Well, we'll get into that. Um, and I know about a month ago we talked about you doing the same sort of thing for some stuff on the Microsoft and the OpenAI side. And
yep.
I figured this would be a good time to kind of look at a couple of others. So, what do you think?
Sounds good. Yeah, agentic AI is big, and there is no shortage of toolkits, frameworks, libraries that will help us uh, do our job. So
No, there are not.
let's take
Yeah.
a let's take a look at what you got.
So, what I did to prepare for this is I took two really, really simple starter agents. And really, what I did was I took the ADK getting started agent, ran it, and then I ported it to LangChainJS just to see exactly what they're going to look like and how they compare and how we use them. So what we'll do is we'll look at the ADK code first, and then we'll look at LangChainJS, and then we're going to look at the web um, interaction environment for both of them to see how they look and how
Okay.
you use each one. What we have up here is the ADK version of this. And I've collapsed a couple of the functions just for the moment. So we focus on this core part, which is the root agent. And there's actually another file, which kind of another Python file init.py, which is the standard starting point, the standard of how everything runs. It's boilerplate. You essentially set it to what they tell you to set it to, and you forget about it. And then you build everything else in agent.py and elsewhere. So we have a root agent, and it needs to be named root agent. That's kind of one of the interesting things about the ADK is they tell you what the name of a number of the variables need to be set to. So here's one case where the agent needs to be named root agent because that's what a bunch of other things are going to look for. And if you're configuring memory, for example, the memory needs to be set to this variable because that's what the system looks for. And that's kind of a pattern I see throughout the entire ADK is a lot of it is done by convention, not by configuration. And that's a common style. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, but it's a very common style, and they tend to follow it. And if there is a way to change it or force it to something else, I never figured out what it was. Um, so there's a lot of things I still don't get about the ADK that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and that's one of them. But we're building a root agent. It's a simple, straightforward agent. We need to define the name, the model name that we're going to be using for it, a description of it, instructions, which kind of turn into the system instructions, and then we specify our tools. And, from what I remember from when you were describing the Microsoft ones, it looked almost the same. I mean, they're all kind of have followed the same pattern, right?
Yeah, generally, you create an agent, you specify what model you're using, you give it some sort of an instruction prompt, you list some tools. Um, some of the things that I did, it was a little bit more, kind of like next step example from this basic example that required things like context so that you could pass something um, across tools or and every tool had access to that context so you could you know pass some information, keep things separate, but yeah, looks pretty similar to both
Right.
open AI's agent library as well as Microsoft semantic kernel.
And that configuration is pretty similar here. I mean, I think the biggest difference is that session memory, that session manager, you specify as a different variable, and it gets that's where you create it and configure it, and it will get passed into the tool functions by default.
Okay.
That's pretty similar. Uh, since we're working in Python, the tool specifications are in a triple quote string at the beginning of the function. The function is the function. We return stuff. That's all fairly standard Python. Um,
Okay.
but again, it's useful to note that it's just a string right at the beginning that eventually gets turned into the tool definition, which is what the agent cares about. And that's eventually going to get translated into what gets passed to the model and what gets called and how, so forth and so on.
Okay.
So that's all fairly straightforward. If we look at the LangChain side, um, this looks a little busier because JavaScript is a little busier of a language.
Yeah.
And because I organize things a little bit differently. But again, creating the agent kind of boils down to we're going to create a React type agent. We need to pass it an LLM, the tools. Um, this is where we configure the memory. So we attach the memory storage system against a specific agent. And there are various
Okay.
reasons for doing so, but that's where we would add it. This is where we configure it. We're just using a very basic memory server,
Okay.
or memory saver, rather. Again, I put out the tools on a different line. We've got two tools. In JavaScript, I break it up into two pieces. So we have one that is the function itself, and that's again a very standard looking JavaScript TypeScript function. And then we have the tool definition for it that says we have a tool that takes up this function, and here's the definition. So it has a name, that's the name that we're going to be using for it, a description for it, and the schema defined using Zod schema.
Okay. Yeah.
And, Zod's pretty standard, it's pretty well known at this point. But this is one of the differences between Python and JavaScript is we need to specify the schema specifically and separately. And we need to specify all of the tool information separately from the function. A lot of the examples show this as all one big thing. I find that a mess to read, which is why
Yeah.
I don't do it. But again, and the other difference, and this is not a mandatory difference, is that in the Python one, when you're specifying a model, you're specifying just the model name. On the LangChain side, you're providing a model definition object. So in there, I could include other configuration.
Okay.
And this is again a really standard. This is a entirely LangChain standard way of doing things. Is specifying a model and defining everything on that model.
Yeah. So a model definition is an object as opposed to just a string
Exactly.
name.
And you can define it as a string. Um, the recommended way to do so, though, is to do it as a full a full model for
Okay.
various reasons. But again, it kind of boils down to creating the agent is just this really simple, straightforward object. There's nothing complicated here. The biggest difference in my mind is that although I've named it agent, it doesn't need to be named agent.
Yeah.
It can be named anything. That's one of the biggest things. The second is that this simplicity that we're looking at here hides a massive amount of complexity under the hood. And for people who are just doing simple React agents, using the create React agent is fine. But when you want to start getting into things like, I want to be able to define different tools under different circumstances, I want to change the tools up, or I want to change the model up. I want to, use one model sometimes and a different model other times, for different things. Or I want to do sanity checking on output, or any one of a number of other things where you want to design exactly the possible ways that the agent can act outside of this simple React loop. They tell you exactly how to do that. They say, here's what that graph looks like, and then you can go modify it. And we'll kind of see in a little bit what that looks like. I'm assuming there is a way to do that with ADK, but I've never found it, and I've never found people who want to talk about how to do that. And their solution to a lot of things is, we now have pre-agent calls and post-agent calls, and we have all of these hooks that are defined, and LangChain does some of that as well. But LangChain also says, look, if those hooks don't work for you, just build your own graph. That's easy. We can,
Yeah.
we're telling you how to do a graph. We're just shortcutting it for you in a lot of cases. So, yeah, and like I said, the other big thing is this can be called anything you want, really. You just need to configure somewhere when you run the user interface what that thing was. So whereas ADK assumes it needs to be named this, and then we will look at the UI and automatically, it will look for that object. LangGraph says, you need to configure which object is the agent you want to use. So it's an interesting difference between the two.
Yeah, and then so this is like creating and configuring the agent, but then actually, the part that's not shown in this is the thing that gets the user's input, whether that be a web interface with type it in text. It could be a voice, with speech to text. It could be SMS, whatever, right? And then the actual calling of the agent saying this is what the user, said. This is the user's prompt or question.
Right. And in both cases, there are ways that you can send something to the agent and wait for something to come back from it and hook that up as you please. Both of them, however, and this is where we get to next, is they both offer a web interface for you to test things out.
Oh, that's nice.
And both of them have a really nice environment for doing so. So let's take a look at each of those one by one. And since it's going to involve me changing windows, what I'm going to do is show how both of them get started first in this window, and then we'll go see what they look like in the other window,
Okay.
rather than me
Fair.
having to switch back and forth between them.
Yeah.
So with ADK, um, we have a command installed called ADK, and we're just going to launch it with ADK web. And it tells me that the server has started and that we can go to this URL and test it out. So
Okay.
easy enough. It kind of gives you some other information, some other defaults, but that's kind of the basics that we're interested in. On the LangChain side, we're going to run the LangGraph CLI development mode. And NPX is just a way that it will load it from the web and install it if it's not already installed. They recommend this just because they push new versions out a lot.
Okay.
So we'll run the LangGraph CLI and it starts some stuff up. And, again, what it does is automatically launches. But, you may notice here, registering graphs from the configuration that's there. There's only been one that's been defined, so it's going to start it. And it's starting on port 2024. Fortunately, it's a different port. And what you didn't see is that it opened that window automatically.
Okay. How was the documentation for this? Was it pretty good or?
That's actually a really good question. And I think part of it kind of boils down to what the defaults on both of them kind of assume, what the getting started guide assumes. The ADK getting started guide assumes that you're going to use ADK web. So this is the software development kit. They tell you to install it in like step 1 or 2. You'll then build your file and you run it with ADK web. So it starts up. The assumption is that you're going to use the web interface to test it. LangGraph, on the other hand, most of their quick start examples, instead of ending here with, exporting agent, they have a few more lines that show you what it's like to invoke the agent with a request and get a response back and how you handle that.
Okay.
So they assume that you're going to be running that as part of your code immediately. And finding the exact documentation for how to get LangGraph working was a little bit tricky. Now, I've given the team feedback on this, and they say they're working on it. And part of the reason that things are in a kind of messy state at the moment is they're literally in the middle of launching LangChain version 1.
Oh, wow.
This is a big moment for them. Lots of things are changing and yet also staying exactly the same. So we will be covering in a future episode soon all of the things that are going on with the new LangChain.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
But the neat part about it, and to their credit, and I've worked with them really hard on this, is they've really taken the attitude of, yes, this is stable now, and we want to make it clear that this is stable, but we also want to start moving forward. So how do we make sure that the code that you wrote yesterday on version 02, 03, 04, whatever the version you were on, still runs, but we also now have a better way to move forward at the same time. And it's, to their credit, they really, really worked hard on this backward compatibility.
Oh, good for them.
And, unlike certain other libraries that I could mention, but won't. Okay, so now what we're looking at is the agent development kit. I wish these had a good name. Sandbox? I don't know what exactly
Yeah.
is the right name to call it. And as part of this, we would then select an agent. And again, we fall back to this notion of convention versus configuration. Because what it does by default is it looks at all of the subdirectories and assumes all of them are their own agent and lets you pick one, which is an interesting choice. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense in this case, but it's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
So I will pick the Python agent, and we have this split pane, one of which is a chat window, the other one of which is going to be providing information about that chat. And we can ask, um, what time is it? And it has insufficient information, so it's following back up with us. Which city are you asking about? And I'll say New York. And we see that it has instructions to do a tool call, and we see that pop up on the left. And when
Yep.
it did that tool call, we see what it's responding to on the right. And
Oh, it's got a nice little diagram.
well, it's an interesting diagram, yes. I'm not sure I understand it, but it's an interesting diagram. I think what it's saying is it's using the get current time to feed into the agent. I'm not quite sure what it means. Um, we can see the request and response for each event, and we can see all of the different events that are the possible invocations.
Okay.
And we have some other neat little things. So we can attach files and record video and audio and so forth. So we can, as part of this, and I think what's interesting is that we can run multiple sessions, and in each session we have its own state. We can see what the overall state is. So if we are setting state in our functions, it will show that to us.
Okay.
And then we have this general trace of, how did a statement get executed? What's the path that it took in each one? And also, if we click on, a conversation one, so we can see the request and response that went into this. So the request, this is exactly what was sent to Gemini. This,
Okay.
if you're
Yeah.
not familiar with what a Gemini packet format looks like, it looks exactly like this. Um, and the response that comes back looks exactly like this.
Yeah.
This is what the object representation is in Python. So pretty easy to use, pretty straightforward, nice and flexible.
No, looks good.
On
Nice little tool.
Yeah, and on the LangGraph side, we have something similar, um, except it's white. No, um, so we can ask here. We would say, "What time is it?" And again, it gives us to provide you with the current time. I need to know which city you're interested in, and How did I lose scope? New York. And it gives the answer back. Now, the interesting thing here is that by default, we don't see what the tool calls are,
Oh, yeah.
which, if what you're trying to get a sense of is how does this feel to a user, okay, that's good. If you want to do some debugging, you can turn the tool calls on. And you'll see, it had the request say, the request from the AI said to get the current time. The tool was called, that's what it returned and sent. And here's what the AI responded to with that. Now, one of the things, of course, is that we don't see exactly what gets sent to Gemini because this tool is designed to be generic for anything. So what we
Yeah.
do end up seeing is, what some of the internal structure is on them. If we really want to see some more of the internal structure, we can go into graph mode. And this is, again, we've got the nice pretty
Oh,
picture and we can see what the flow is from each node to each other. Now, when I said it has this graph under the hood, this is the graph that it has. If we had built this graph
yeah.
ourselves, it would show us that representation. And at any point, we can look at, we see where it was going in the conversation
Oh,
flow for
okay.
each
Yeah.
turn. And we can see, here's what the human sent, and here's what the agent did. It had the AI said to get the current time, and it evaluated that in the tool node to get that data back. In each case, we can view what the state was, not just overall, but what the state was at that moment in the conversation. So if we're using this to debug and we've got weird state at some point, we can go back and look at what the state was.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of the notable differences between LangGraph and I think any of the others, and I think this is significant, is that it views the conversation as state. So there's nothing special about the conversation in a LangChain agent. The conversation is just another piece of state that gets managed.
Okay.
And I find, so here we can see lots and lots of the details that were passed. There's more details than I thought, actually.
Yeah.
So if we're just testing, we have this nice simple interface. And when we run into issues, we can switch into the graph and see what was going on each turn.
Okay.
And we can go into, look at what each individual thread that's been running is doing. And we can look at, and again, here we get back to, again, the notion of convention versus configuration. So here, my React agent was defined in a LangGraph file to point at what specific object that agent reflects. But that's in a configuration file that I had to give it. We see that trade-off between the two.
Yeah, different. Like one, LangGraph and LangChain are building on top of like months and months of adding stuff up, and some. In this case, Google had an opportunity to say, "Let's do a brand new
Right.
developer kit." And
I think one of the things I like about LangGraph's approach is that it really does boil down to this notion of state. LangGraph itself is all about state management. It's all about the transitions.
yeah,
When you're moving from one of these nodes to another node, it's you're moving based on state information. And you can build complex decisions here that say if the state is in one particular way, go to one node, and if it's not, go to a different node. So if the last thing you got back was an error, you want to do something different,
yeah,
and that's how you control it. And to me,
yeah. It
that's a
kind of
really
mixes.
powerful way to do it.
Yeah, it's more of a mix. You get some of the power, or at least some of the control back, when we used to have to hand script all that conversation and the state transitions in a conversation. You get some of that back.
Yes.
So that's nice.
That's nice. But at the same time, when you're just starting out and just trying to get this agent working, you don't need to deal with it.
Yeah.
The things like this tool node, that's a standard node that they have defined. If you don't need it to do anything different than it's predefined with a list of tools and it runs with them, great, use the standard one. And if you need to do something different, here's how. That's what I really like about LangGraph.
Well, and like LangGraph is that you can choose different models from different providers.
Well, that's,
right? And
I think, to be fair, I believe that ADK says, you're not limited to Gemini. And I don't even think the OpenAI and Microsoft ones say you're limited to theirs. Just that those happen to be the defaults.
Yeah.
LangChain is much more agnostic up front.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it definitely has a long history of purposely being agnostic.
yes,
So.
and admittedly, at times they've leaned towards OpenAI's work. That tends to be the one that they go with first. But as other models, for example, introduced reasoning, they were going with how the other models were doing it. There's very much a number of people that are very dedicated to supporting Anthropic's approaches to doing things, which is a little different. Um, and the more I push for Gemini stuff, and they listen, and they say, okay, we get how Gemini is doing things differently. How do we support that in generic ways? And
Yeah.
that's actually one of the biggest changes that's coming with 1.0 is that much of the work that I had done with Gemini, the multimodality with Gemini, is now really reflected in the core LangChain structure of how it does things. Even though
Yeah.
not every model supports that, it's now kind of built into LangChain itself.
That's nice.
It's nice. It also means that, in LangGraph, you'll start to be able to do some really, really interesting things, I think. I'm looking forward to showing how multimodal agents can do some really interesting things.
Yeah. That would be pretty cool. Good job. Nice, very concise on the demos, and it was good to be able to see it running in action and the playgrounds or whatever sandboxes that were used to test those out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I wish I had done a little bit more of was show you exactly what that state management looks like for both of them, and what memory management is like, and how to do that on both. They're very, in some ways they're similar, and in some ways they're very different. Again, it's
Yeah.
I think there are only a few things that people would find strange about LangGraph. Um, but overall, I think these are both solid kits along, same as OpenAI, same as Microsoft's. Um,
Yeah.
it really boils down to what are you used to using and how are you approaching things.
Well, yeah. That's a good thing in the fact that you can go from where you are, what languages, what's your background, and still have an avenue to do agents and AI.
And I think that's vital. These are important tools. Um, work in the language and with the other libraries that you're most familiar with, because that's how you're going to get some amazing stuff done.
Yeah.
So as always, I'd love to hear what people are using when they're developing agents. Are you using one of these libraries to make your life a little bit easier? How are you testing them out? What does the front end for them look like when you're working on them? uh, as always, feel free to give us comments below. We hope you like, subscribe, and share, and we will be back another time to talk about this and so much more on Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great week.
You too. Take care.